In a quiet Texas neighborhood, one woman decided Christmas was against the rules. She wasn't trying to ruin the holidays. She just wanted control. But when she tried to ban the lights, the songs, and the joy itself, her neighbors decided to fight back. This is the true story of how one community stood up to their very own Christmas Karen. You ever met someone who seems allergic to joy? Not just irritated by it, but truly opposed to it. This story begins with a woman named Diane, but in her neighborhood, everyone called her something else, the Christmas Karen. Every year, she found a new way to shrink the season, to clip the lights, to quiet the laughter, to turn community spirit into a checklist of violations. But this year, something changed. Because this year, the rule book fought back. It was early winter in Plano, Texas, a peaceful cookie-cutter suburb where every mailbox looked the same. Every lawn was trimmed to perfection, and every neighbor waved, sometimes sincerely, sometimes out of habit. Mark and Jenny had just moved in. It was their first house, their first Christmas as a married couple, and they were excited to finally decorate something that was theirs. They had read most of the HOA bylaws, 63 pages of fine print about fences, trash bins, and acceptable paint colors. They thought the holiday section was just common sense. Don't block sidewalks. Don't use blinding lights. Don't set your roof on fire. On November 25th, a week after Thanksgiving, Mark went out with a staple gun and a box of warm white lights, the kind that makes a home look cozy, not loud. By sunset, their small brick house glowed softly. Jenny smiled and said it finally felt like Christmas. Then, at 8:12 p.m., Mark's phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA president. The subject line read, "Immediate violation, exterior illumination, section 14.2. The sender was Diane. The message was short. Holiday lighting is not permitted prior to December 10th. Please remove immediately to avoid fines." Mark blinked at the screen. He thought it was a mistake, maybe an automated message. He replied politely, "Hi, Diane. Just confirming. Are early lights really not allowed? We'll happily adjust if needed." A minute later, the reply came back. "They are not allowed. Rules exist for a reason. This is your formal warning." The next morning, Diane began her patrol. Clipboard in hand, phone camera ready. She took photos of everything. A mailbox bow, a wreath that stuck out half an inch too far, even a snowman inflatable in someone's yard. She didn't wave at anyone. She just documented. By noon, the community's Facebook group was on fire. One post read, "Can the HOA ban inflatables?" asking for Frosty. Another, "We've been putting up lights since the 90s. Why now?" Diane replied to every comment, quoting sections of the HOA manual like Bible verses. Safety, uniformity, insurance risk. Those were her favorite words. She banned lights before December 10th. She banned yard inflatables. She even banned outdoor music if it could be heard from the sidewalk. Mrs. Alvarez, a 75-year-old neighbor who'd lived there for decades, put up a small nativity scene next to her hibiscus plant. It was the same one she'd used since 1971. Hand-carved, gentle, harmless. The next day, she found a printed citation tucked under the shepherd's figurine. And that's when people began to split. Some said, "Rules are rules." Others whispered, "This isn't about rules anymore." Mark didn't want trouble. But when he got his second violation letter, this time for fairy lights wrapped around the maple tree in his yard, he decided to read the HOA bylaws again, carefully, line by line. One clause caught his attention. Discretionary landscaping stipends for board members may be issued as necessary for community uniformity. It was vague, too vague. And Diane's house, her flower beds, her roses, looked far better than anyone else's. Priya, another neighbor who worked as an accountant, looked at the rule with him and said, "Vague clauses are like closets. People hide things in them. So Mark sent a polite email to the HOA asking to see the financial records for landscaping expenses from the past year. Days passed. No reply. Then one afternoon, he received a PDF, 3 pages of invoices. Half the lines were blacked out with thick redactions. Still, one line slipped through. Mailbox perimeter. Premium rose installation. $2,460. And there was only one mailbox in the neighborhood surrounded by premium roses. Diane's. Mark showed the invoice to Priya. She sighed and said, "Looks like our HOA funds are being used for her personal garden." But they didn't want to accuse her without proof. So they started quietly gathering evidence. Every evening, Mark walked around the neighborhood with his phone camera. He'd take pictures of areas listed in the budget: North Median landscaping, East entrance refresh. Most looked untouched. He started to notice a pattern. The only area that looked maintained was the one right outside Diane's house. Meanwhile, Diane was doubling down. She sent a final holiday reminder to everyone. Any property found with decorations prior to December 10th will incur fines and possible legal enforcement. Jenny filmed her one afternoon, standing under their maple tree with a tape measure. "Under canopy lighting is prohibited," Diane said flatly, as if reading from a law book. Tom, a retired veteran who lived down the street, asked her politely if his daughter's school choir could sing Christmas songs on the sidewalk next week. Diane frowned and said, "The sidewalk is not a permitted venue for acoustic gatherings." Ashley, a teacher, pulled up an old photo on her phone showing Diane's house, fully lit up the previous November. When she posted it to the group chat, Diane replied, "That was a board-approved pilot program." No one had ever heard of a pilot program before. Few days later, Mark and Priya discovered something new. The HOA records showed a common area upgrade, billed for over $5,000. But when Samir, a neighbor who worked in IT, checked the actual site, he found no upgrades, no new mulch, no new plants, not even fresh paint on the fence. He zoomed into the PDF Diane had sent earlier. The document had been redacted, but faint text could still be seen behind the black bars. At the bottom of one invoice, it said, "Completed as discussed with D." They didn't need a full name to know who D was. Mark wanted to handle it quietly. He wasn't looking to start a war. He just wanted fairness, the same rules for everyone. But Diane wasn't making that easy. On the morning of December 1st, she sent another letter, this time hand-delivered. It said, "Continued non-compliance may result in legal escalation." Jenny opened it and felt her stomach twist. They weren't criminals. They were just trying to celebrate Christmas. That night, as Mark walked his dog, he saw Diane across the street, flashlight in hand, inspecting someone's lawn ornaments. He stood still, watching her. She took pictures, wrote something in her notepad, and moved on. It felt less like neighborhood management and more like surveillance. The next day, things started to change. Tom, the veteran, knocked on Mark's door. He said, "You're not alone. We've all had enough." Ashley printed out copies of the redacted invoices. Priya put together a spreadsheet comparing the HOA's claimed expenses with what they actually saw in the neighborhood. And Mark decided it was time to speak up. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for December 12th. It was usually a quiet affair, 5 or 6 people, coffee, maybe a box of cookies. But this time, more than 30 residents showed up. The atmosphere was thick. Some people whispered, others sat with crossed arms. Diane arrived with her binder and her usual expression of calm superiority. She started with her opening speech. "Our goal as a community is to maintain safety, order, and uniformity. The holiday season, while festive, can bring hazards, traffic congestion, electrical issues." Mark stood up. "Excuse me, Diane. Can I ask a question?" She paused. "Questions are for the end, please." He didn't sit down. "I think this one can't wait," he said. He held up the printed invoices and began to speak. He didn't shout. His voice was calm, deliberate. "These are the landscaping expenses from this year, and I believe some of these payments were for personal property improvements, specifically your home." The room went silent. Diane blinked, her expression tightening. "That's a serious accusation, Mark." "I agree," he said. "That's why I'm bringing receipts." Priya stood and joined him. She explained the discrepancies, how thousands of dollars were marked as common area upgrades, but matched only Diane's address. Samir showed photos and dates on a screen, before and after shots of the so-called North Median refresh, which hadn't been touched all year. Then came the final piece, a video clip from a neighbor's doorbell camera. Diane, in broad daylight, measuring someone's lights and muttering, "Ridiculous. They think rules don't apply to them." The tension in the room was electric. No one moved. No one spoke. Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly neighbor, slowly stood up. She held something small in her hand, the baby Jesus figurine from her nativity set. She said softly, "I think rules without kindness make a neighborhood smaller." Her words landed like a pin drop in a cathedral. Even Diane looked uncertain for a second. Then she straightened her papers. "These accusations are unfounded," she said. "Everything I've done has been for the good of this community." But her voice was shaking now. Tom, sitting in the back, said quietly, "Good for the community or good for your front yard?" Laughter rippled across the room. Nervous but real. The HOA's attorney, who had been sitting in the corner, finally spoke. He said, "From a legal perspective, any board-directed funds benefiting a member's private property are subject to review and possible reimbursement." "It's standard procedure." Diane froze. She had no more words. The board members exchanged glances. One finally said, "We'll schedule an independent audit immediately." Another added, "Effective today, we recommend the president take a leave of absence." That was it. Diane gathered her papers and left the room without looking back. The door closed softly behind her. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then someone clapped, and then another. And soon, the room filled with quiet applause. Not for victory, but for relief. Outside, the neighborhood was still. For the first time in weeks, the streetlights seemed warmer. The next morning, an email went out from the HOA. "Pending review. Vice President Tom will act as interim chair. All fines issued under the holiday section are temporarily suspended." Mark and Jenny sat at their kitchen table, reading it in silence. Jenny smiled. "We can finally plug the lights back in." Mark nodded. "Let's make it count." That evening, one by one, houses on the block lit up. Not extravagantly, just soft, golden, defiant light. Even Mrs. Alvarez's little nativity scene glowed under her porch light again. Neighbors came outside, waving to each other, exchanging cookies, laughter, and cautious hope. Mark looked down the street and saw something he hadn't seen since they moved in. People smiling for real. For a few nights, peace returned. Until 3 months later, an email from another neighborhood circulated online. "Introducing our new HOA president, Diane L." Mark stared at it and laughed quietly. Some people never change. They just move to a new zip code. Helped untangle the cords and plug them in. That night, the whole street shimmered with light. Not perfect, not identical, but alive. And for the first time, the neighborhood felt like a neighborhood again. Mark looked around and thought about how fragile peace can be, and how quickly it can be repaired when people decide to care. He said quietly, all it took was standing up and not backing down. Jenny smiled and replied, "And believing that kindness is louder than control." For weeks, everything was calm. No letters, no fines, no fear. But word spreads fast between HOAs. A friend from a nearby subdivision sent Mark a screenshot of their newsletter. "Exciting leadership update. Our new president, Diane L., promises to bring strong structure and community standards to our neighborhood. He laughed and shook his head. He forwarded the screenshot to Priya with a single line. Looks like she found a new stage. Priya replied, let's hope they learn faster than we did. And maybe that's how these stories go. Neighborhoods rise and fall on the smallest things. A strand of lights, a rule book, a single person's obsession with control. But they can also rebuild through something just as small. A conversation, a smile, a cup of cocoa shared over a fence. Because in the end, community isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up, not shutting down. And it's about remembering that rules should protect people, not punish them. Mark still walks his dog at night, passing the glowing houses. He sometimes stops under the maple tree, looks at the lights, and remembers that winter when everything almost fell apart, and then came back stronger. He says, almost to himself, some fences are meant to protect, others are meant to be climbed. And then he walks home, past the wreaths, the laughter, and the warmth that no rule book could ever ban.